Welcome to part 2 of this series of videos where we look at Blazor WebAssembly from a beginner's point of view. In this video we look at displaying a simple list. This will be the list we will be aiming for. It is just a list of countries showing the country ID and country name. But before we open Visual Studio and start making the changes to create this list, I wanted to have a quick recap on what Blazor WebAssembly is and its architecture. The thing that distinguishes Blazor WebAssembly from Blazor Server is that the main application is downloaded from the server to the client, and in particular, data is transferred between the server and client, and vice versa, by means of an API. Furthermore, the nucleus of the API on the server are controllers. Controllers handle requests from the client and prepare responses. In contrast, Blazor Server does not require this method of handling data, although I think it could be used if one was a real masochist. I also want to digress and have a quick look at controllers in a bit more detail. In Visual Studio, the controllers folder here is on the server project, and we created a controller by selecting right click, add, and then controller. And we then selected API and the empty API controller and gave it a name. I'm going to call this one person, and I'm going to be deleting it in a minute. But my purpose of creating this controller is to show you this. When we create it, the default template or pattern has a root of API / and then controller in square brackets. And the public class is the person controller, the same as the file name. Right, let me close that. I just wanted to show you that that was the default that gets created. And I'm going to delete this while I remember it. And have a look at city controller. So this is the city controller, and we can see here that we've got the same pattern here of the root being API / and controller in square brackets. And we've got city controller here as the name of the public class. And further down we've got the list of cities which we've created. I just keep those out of the way. Then we've got two methods here. HTTP GET for all cities and HTTP GET for a particular city, and this is the route that it's going to. So it's going to pick up that as the root of the route and then put city ID on the end. So if we run this now, when the application starts, we can append on here /API /city. And the important thing there is that we've got to have the final / on the end. And if I hit return, we get a list of all the cities. This is in JSON format. If we want a particular city, one of the options is to put the city ID at the end. So if I put city number 6 and hit carriage return, I get city number 6. But it is simply convention that we have API here. That could be anything. I could put cat there, and it would work just as well. So let me run it with cat just to demonstrate that. We still need the final / and we get a list of cities, even though that says cat and not API. I'll change that back to API. But the other interesting thing is that we've got controller in here, And that picks up the name that we've got here as part of the public class. So if I was to change that, for example, from city to, let's say, lemon, or yeah, lemon will do, I get these squiggly lines and it says I need to restart it. I'm going to restart it off screen and then come back. So I have restarted the application and we've now got public class lemon controller. Notice down here the file is still city controller. And now if we run it, I can append /API/lemon and we get a list of cities. So that's interesting, and we'll come back to this in a later video. But I'm now going to change that back to city again. And I'm going to restart the application. So I'll be back in a second. The other point I wanted to digress and discuss is this return. We're returning OK, and that's one of the HTTP responses. So here we've got return OK, and we're going to return with the list of cities. Down here, we're going to put in a particular city ID, and we're going to say that if it doesn't find a city, it should return not found, and with a message saying, sorry, city not found, or it should return OK with the city. So let me run it again, and I append /API/city. We get the list of cities. Now I'm using Microsoft Edge, and we can go to Developer Tools, and I can show you a little bit more about these responses. If we select the Network tab here and refresh it, we can see here we've got /city and a status code of 200. That is the status code that's returned for a success. Now, if I was to put in city/5, for example, now we can see here we've got the name is 5 and we've got a success status of 200. On the other hand, if I was to put 50 here and return, we can see we've got 50 and a status of 404. That's the not found status. There are a number of statuses, and I've found a website which we can look at to give us these status codes. This is the list of status codes, and it's at this web address, and I'll put a link to this web address in the description. So we can see here we've got different types of response, but if we scroll down, we'll see that OK is response 200, and 404, which everyone will be familiar with, is not found. So the not found in the code, we're telling it here to respond 404. And in fact, if we take out this message, and rerun the application, and again put in /API/city/50, we get this gobbledygook returned, and we can see in here status 404. So that's what we're doing in the code when we're saying return not found or return OK. If we said return and some of these other responses, such as forbidden or method not allowed, that was the return code that we would get. Right, so much for that digression. We'll now move on to actually creating the list of cities. We will be using a razor component to display our list of countries. But before we can display data on our web page, we're going to need to add a few more links to the chain to get the data. We have already created one of those links, a controller. The next link is a mechanism called a service, and to make the system as flexible as possible, the service itself is served through yet another link called an interface. We'll be adding a number of services, and to keep them all in one place, we're going to add a folder in the client project called Services, and within that folder we will create separate folders for each entity. Right-click on the client project, select Add and New Folder, and we're going to call it Services. And within that folder, we'll want separate folders for the country service and the city service. So right-click again, Add, New Folder, Country Service, and while we're about it, we may as well add the folder for City Service. Now we have the folders, we'll add an interface class and then an implementation class. To add the interface class, right-click on the country service folder and select Add Class. Select the interface option and we'll call it iCountry Service. Click Add. Now to add the service or implementation, right-click on the country service folder, select Add and Class again. Select Class here and we'll just call it Country Service. We will be making a number of changes to these files, but before embarking on the major change, it makes sense to register the service now. And to do that, we need to make one small change to Country Service. Change the existing code to add iCountry Service to the public class. So, colon, iCountry Service, and it even suggests it for us. Now to register this program, we need to find the program CS in the client file, client project, and we need to add to the top a couple of lines of code. We want to add in here a global statement, a global using statement which points to the client project services country service, and down here we need to add this line which adds the iCountry Service space country service. This will allow it to be injected into a page we're going to be creating for the list of countries. Going back up here for a second, if we're having a global using statement, the global lines must appear at the top of the file. And since we're going to need access to the shared project, we could also add a global using statement to the program CS. So we'll add this line as well. It's also probably superfluous, but we could also add a using statement in the imports CS file. So we find the imports and we just add this line. So that again just allows the system to access the folder. Next step is to have a look at the country service, and we're going to be adding some lines in here. So first of all, we're going to add this code. So we're declaring here a list of type country called countries, and we're adding two tasks. One, get countries with no parameters, and one task that says get country by ID, where we'll be passing in the ID, which is of course an integer. The next stage is to amend the code in country service. And I'm going to do this by just replacing the code we've already got with some that I've already created. So bear with me. So if I go to country service, and I'm just going to replace it. That red squiggle there is because we haven't implemented those two items we've got in country service. We haven't got these two tasks in here yet. But if we go back to here, and I'll replace it with the code that I've got in the clipboard, we've got this. So what we've got here is, first of all, a using statement for system.net.http.json, and that's because our get countries down here uses get from JSON async. Then we've got this is a constructor for the HTTP client, and then we're declaring a list of countries of type country, and it's a new list. And we're also declaring the HTTP get. Then we've got the two tasks. We've got the get countries and the get country by ID. Now this one, we haven't got anything there yet. It says throw not implemented exception. So this is the one that we're actually going to be using for the list. We're declaring a variable called result, and then we're awaiting the HTTP get from JSON async. It's a list of countries, and look, here's our API/country creeping in. So that will get the results from that API that we created earlier. And if the result is not null, the countries will be returned as the result. So that's effectively getting the data. So the next stage is to add a razor component which will display the list on a page. So this again is under services, and under pages we've already got the counter, the fetch data and the index, and we need to add a new one. So I'm going to right click, add, and it's a razor component. And the rules for razor components are that they must begin with a capital letter or an uppercase letter, and I prefer to always call them page at the end so we know what we're talking about, and because in the past I've experienced a clash with classes in other parts of the system with the same name. So I'm going to call this country list page. And again, to save time, I'm going to copy some code into here. So this is the code for the razor page. So the page itself is going to be /country list. So when we run the application, that's the route to the page. We're injecting the iCountry service so we can get the data. The page title is going to say countries list, and this is the item that will be displayed at the very top on the browser tab. And then we've got countries list shown at as a heading. Now you'll see this section down here is effectively HTML. So we've got a table of class table, and we've got a header which is this section here. We've got a row which has got effectively two columns, one that says country ID and one that says country name. And then we've got a body, which is this section. And what it does is cycle round each country in the country service.countries, and we'll come to that in a second. And we're showing the country ID and the country name. In the code section down here, the protected override async task on initialized. Async means that this is going to happen when the page is initialized or is first displayed. And what we're going to do is simply await the country service get countries, which is this item here, and we'll be using the get from JSON async to read the data from API country. We haven't got a way of displaying this page yet other than by just manually typing in country list. So I think what we'll do is add this to the menu so we don't have to manually type that in. On the client project, there's a folder called shared, and in there is the menu called navmenu.razor. So this is when we run the system, this is the menu that we get at the moment. So we've got home, county, counter, and fetch data. So what I'm going to do is just steal one of these items and copy it. And what we need to do is replace fetch data with this section up here, which just says country list. So I may as well copy and paste that. And we'll call it country list. The icons here are called Open Iconic, and I'll put a link in the description to all the Open Iconic icons. I think I can just use OI-list and it'll just produce a simple list icon. And again, while we're here, we may as well change the name of the application from Blazor countries WASM to something like countries and cities. Now you have to be careful of that. So we'll save everything and we'll run it. And I'm going to be holding my breath as usual. So there's our application. Here's countries list, and we've renamed it countries and cities. If I click countries list, we get our list of countries with the ID and the country name. Success. This is a basic HTML list, and what we'll be doing in the next video is we'll start using Syncfusion, which has a number of controls which will help make our application look pretty. And one of those things is, of course, a list. It'll include things like drop-downs, dialog boxes, and other controls. But that's for next time. Thank you very much for watching this video. I'll put a list at the end of this video and in the description of some links that I think will be helpful or useful or just simply plain interesting. Thank you very much.